Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 254 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Wren, and the show notes are located at continuefit.com. It's where you'll find all my resources. All right, today on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about his article, Planning for Rest, as well as two of the coaching minute segments that he did. Is periodization strength and conditioning's biggest waste of time? He actually did 3 coaches minute segments on that, and dealing with parents and coaches. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to talk about best practices for developing a culture when you're renting from somebody else. I know I said that was the last week's one, but actually last week was the Facebook group question, so sorry about that. So for the Functional Movement System segment, Diane Vives finishes up her series on bringing a stability solution to a mobility problem. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty and Tim Robinson are on to talk about choosing the right metrics. Remember, you got to get with the online training thing. If you're not, you're behind the curve. Go to trainheroic.com, start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. All right, for the bodybyboyleonline.com, hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. We got Ken Clark. He's a speed expert and the assistant professor in the Department of Kinesiology at Westchester University. Got him on to talk about speed and his in-service at MBSC, which is also on bodybyboyleonline.com. And that was the latest research and application of speed. We spoke about the 40-yard dash and why he thinks it's a great place to start to look at team sport athletes, velocity profiles, cues for speed, why top speed matters for team sports. Some people don't feel like it always does. Technology and coaching speed. His thoughts on strength training for speed, always a controversial topic. The 3-bucket pose, and so much more. I mean, this was such a great in-service that he did, and I really love this interview. It's a long one, so lots of things to get to. Let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day answering questions. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
Yeah, I am doing spectacular. It actually almost looks like spring here in Massachusetts, so that's a good sign.
I know it's gorgeous here in New York too. So it's I got a little spring in my step. No pun intended.
Yep, the Mike Potenza weather coming off Game 7. Potenza's pretty nice out here, just so you know.
Mike, yeah, man, I'm sure he's still sleeping right now. So San Jose Sharks with their big win. Coach, let's talk about, did you name this article wrong? Should it have been, is advanced periodization strength and conditioning's biggest time waster? Talk about the article, and are you talking about periodization? Because obviously you plan for stuff, or is it really advanced periodization that you have a problem with?
I guess it's really advanced periodization or the fascination with periodization, because it's amazing. And I was having this conversation with, maybe with you or with somebody else, where I was saying, you know, when somebody asks me a question and I have to look up what they're asking about to figure out what that actually means, then I know it's like, wow, you know, daily undulating, auto-regulation. There's like, it seems like every month there's something else, you know, concurrent, conjugate. You know, it can literally be a study in and of itself that I don't think is all that necessary. I always go back, I point to that Variety and Strength Training article by, sadly, the late Charles Poliquin now, that was written, I think, either 82 or 84. And I link to it all the time for people and say, read that article. It's a complicated process. And I guess my thing, and this is what I talked about a little bit today on the Instagram post too, was I am dealing with the best athletes in the world in a lot of different sports. And I don't feel the need for a lot of these things. And so I think, are there that many people that are dealing with that many athletes that are that much better than what we're doing? Or are there people who just are sort of fascinated with this because and there are a lot of posts, it makes people seem smart. People can use big words and argue about things. And most of them, I argued about many things. Some of them actually mattered is a quote that I like. It's like, it just really doesn't, does somebody really believe that, 3 sets of 3 or 3 sets of 2 or 4 sets of 1 or does any of that really matter? And my feeling is no, it really doesn't matter. What matters is change. And I think that was hopefully what I got across to people in the article. You don't want to do the same thing. You don't want to be linear because, again, I think you do need to understand periodization. You just don't need to be fascinated with it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have the different seasons. That's taking, that's periodizing, right? There's different off-season and season, right? You do different things. You're also talking about, not just the straight linear periodization where you're just adding weight every week, but, you're kind of, what I guess Charlie Weingroff would call that a lateralization, changing up the exercises, but making it similar, right? Similar but different.
Right.
And
I think, Baldwin called it variation without change. I think my thing is you need to understand it. I just don't think you need to waste time on it. I think once you understand it, it doesn't need to become an area of study. Like I think you could spend a whole college semester studying periodization, and I'm not sure that would make you a better strength coach. Yeah.
Would you think that, obviously, like you said, I think maybe it was in the Instagram post as well, maybe for Olympic lifting, for some track sports, it would obviously, and when you're dealing with individual sports, it might be something to kind of think a little bit more about.
Yep, and I think so. When you get into sports that are won or lost in milliseconds, and when you get into championships that are won or lost by pounds, that's different. But I guess and this is what, kind of goes back to what we've talked about a bunch in the last, say, 6 months. There's so many people that work with powerlifters or work with weightlifters or work with track and field people who are really influencing strongly what we're doing in sport. And the reality is sport is much more about like the slight edge idea or, whatever, the aggregation or marginal gains idea. It's much more about consistency than it is about the sort of fine, minute details of periodization.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. That being said, your other article that you wrote last week was planning for rest. So almost sounds like you're being hypocritical here, right? Like, hey, wait a minute, Mike. Come on. Talk to us about this. I really like this idea. I think we had a couple discussions on the forum, especially with hockey, and we talked a little bit about that. But there was a John Tortorella video that you liked. And, when we get the schedule, I look for days off, he said. So talk to us about this article.
I loved that Tortorella video when I first saw it. And then after they came out and smoked Tampa, I was like, it's interesting because Tampa was involved, in the race for the President's Trophy and, in setting all these records. And then they go down, basically they get swept. Whereas Tortorella is talking about at the beginning of the season, I'm trying to figure out when our days off now. And I don't know what Tampa did or didn't do, and I don't want that to be sort of an indictment of Tampa because I have no inside information as to what they did. But it is, in these long seasons, planning for rest makes a really big difference. But I look at that and think, hey, that's the simplest part of periodization. What's our day off going to be? Let's do less. Let's not have practices that are so long, as opposed to, are we going to do, Shako versus Smolov cycles of, squatting? You know what I mean? Like that's the stuff. It's like, I guess it's macro versus micro, when you start looking at this. I think people need to be way more macro and figure out, okay, what am I going to do? And how am I going to be consistent with my work versus being micro and thinking, what today's, set number is going to be. And, as I said, you've got APRE, which I can't even remember what that stands for anymore. And, auto-regulation. And I read an article on auto-regulation and it's like, I was like, auto-regulation is kind of training, auto-regulate, train based on the way you feel. The guy says in the article, but it's not training based on the way you feel. And I'm like, if it's not, what is it? I don't really understand. And I guess my point is, I always think if I'm confused, there's a really good chance that a lot of people are confused, because I feel like I've got a reasonably good handle on strength and conditioning after 38 years, yet suddenly somebody can fire a monkey wrench into things, and I can be standing there going, I don't really know what this person's talking about.
Yeah, and I think it starts with some good intentions in terms of, like, even with, like, the data, right? Like, all the data that kind of, like, people were kind of overthinking, and, you know, hey, here's all this data, we're going to collect all this data. It's a similar idea. We're looking for this slight edge, right? But I think we kind of take it too far and forget that we might not be as important as we think we are.
Yeah, and just, I think you can wedge yourself very firmly in that rabbit hole that you're flying down, and realize that's why I love, years ago on the podcast, Dave Tenney talked about gathering a lot of data and not doing anything with it right away. Just kind of gather it and look at it. And I thought that was such a brilliant idea. He's like, I don't know what we're going to do with the data, because until we have data, we don't know what it's going to tell us. And I thought that was really smart, as opposed to people sort of, pinballishly reacting to whatever they might see at that given moment. And what I think, I had a conversation with a really good sports scientist, and one of the things that he was talking about was just that, so we're losing the coaching part of this, which is the real maybe auto regulation, is that person looking at the group and saying, wait a second, are we tired? I felt like, and I always thought, when we were at BU, we did a great job of that, of keeping sort of the pulse. I used to say all the time that what I want to know, I don't want to know what the hardest working guy thinks, and I don't want to know what the laziest guy thinks, but I really want to know what the middle of the roster guy thinks. Because, even when people say, do questionnaires, gather data, I was kind of like, well, there's people on one end whose data is not going to be good, because they're always going to be like, we need to do more. And there's people on the other end whose data isn't going to be good, because they're always going to say, I think we need to do less. And what I used to look and think, like, when I had some guys that were good, hard workers, I'd kind of be like, oh, if those guys are tired, we're already in big trouble. It's because, our top end guys are crapping out on us a little bit. So I do think that there's always going to be art to go with the science. And I think we've just got to be careful sometimes that we don't become so fascinated by the science that we lose the art. Absolutely.
Good stuff. The Coaches Minute segment you did on parents and coaches, dealing with parents and coaches, and I think it was interesting. I posted one of the responses to you on the strengthcoach.com forum. Somebody responded on Instagram, and he had just said, basically, because, look, I'm a parent, I don't think you should completely discount the lack of, after you get back, you discount the lack of training background. You might hear something about the kid based on that parent being in the arena for 10 plus years, watching the kid day in and day out. I don't know about that. I think, maybe this guy's an outlier, but there is more information out there. People are a little bit more educated. I understand. I think everybody got defensive in terms of, I don't want the parents telling me what to do, and I don't go in and tell the doctors, but actually people are telling doctors. They're going in there and internet diagnosing as well, so they're dealing with it too. But I don't know, I just think at least we should think about keeping one ear open, but maybe not in your case with the big groups. Somebody's doing semi-privates, you might be able, because you're going to be able to change some programs. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that comment. I thought it was, at least made me think a little bit.
Oh, it made me think a lot that it was sort of, because I'm going to do another one of those tomorrow, but I wanted to get the one on this periodization article in, because my social media advisor told me that I needed to get them up there when I have the articles going.
There you go.
But what I realized is I may have kind of missed the mark on that in a sense, because my thing wasn't, like, I wasn't saying it to piss off parents, but obviously I think that guy took it a little bit to heart. But when I read it, I was like, oh, I get it. Like, the difference is, and this is where I get myself in trouble. I wrote this down the other day, and I have to decide whether to do this tomorrow or not. 90% of parents think their kid is better than he is, or she is. That is my experience in doing this for whatever, 20 plus years. It is very rare that a parent comes in, with an accurate analysis of their young athlete. Very, very rare. So now, do they know something about their athlete? Yeah, they probably do. They're probably very in tune to that kid's personality or whatever it is. But that can be a problem. But I do think, you do need to listen, and I think you need to listen more because, hey, these are your customers. These are your best word of mouth proponents, and you can't. And that's what I liked about the Mark Huber article that I mentioned in the beginning. Mark was talking more about coaches, but I've seen guys lose their job in strength and conditioning because they refuse to listen to the coaches that they're effectively working for, not with. And I think in some ways it's the same reason people don't succeed in business. If I just looked at parents and were like, you have no clue, you don't have any idea what you're talking about, stop bothering me and leave your kid here, that would not probably be a really good sales pitch for my business. But there are days sometimes when when I'm answering the questions, I talked to a dad the other day, he's talking about, I get this all the time. It's all about core strength. And I'm like, not really. That's a new kind of current buzzword. I get it, but it's not like all about core strength. There's a lot of other variables that are going to come into play about that. And then I get don't worry about him. He's great. He can move. He just needs to get stronger. Or I get, he can't move at all. He just needs to get faster. You always every parent sort of has a very oversimplified analysis based on all the time they have spent watching their kids. And the problem is, and this is what I'm going to try to get across, I have to figure out how to get this across tomorrow in a minute. It's very much like someone showing up at, the elementary school with their kid with a copy of War and Peace, and thinking, hey, I want Mark to read War and Peace. Me looking at him and going can he read? What's his grade level? What's his reading grade level right now? Because that might be a little bit too advanced book for him. And and I think in strength and conditioning, sometimes I need to figure out how to better analogize, if that is even a word, for parents in terms of saying okay, you need to understand that I understand what you want for your kid. It's the same thing we all want. That's what I mean. Everybody's parents are well-intentioned. Everybody would love for their kid to be, either the star in high school varsity and then get a college scholarship and then go on to play professionally, right? I mean, that's, I hate, sadly, I think most parents have that dream in their mind. But the reality is there needs to be some place to start. Where do we start this process? And I think that's the difficult part, is getting people to realize, the best place to start is at the beginning. And I use the quote all the time, the best time to plant the tree is today. But, the second best time was 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago. Or, But today is what we have. And then you get into long-term athletic development. We need the learn to train phase before we can worry about any of this stuff. We can't, you can't, and I go, I wrote down the thing today about the Stephen Covey idea, the law of the farm. You can't speed farm. You can't just look around and think, okay, I need corn by tomorrow. Well, sorry, actually, you won't get corn by tomorrow. There's a certain amount of time that you got to plant seeds, and then you got to water, and you got to fertilize, and you got to do all this stuff. And then eventually, when it's all over, the crops will come up. But, you won't get the harvest immediately. And that's the part I think that I guess that a lot of people in our industry struggle with both coaches and parents.
Yeah, I think people just need to understand how to relax and talk to people and to understand and listen. Like you said, we need to be able to listen the right way. They are our customers. I know when golfers came in, they always had this idea core strength, and I need mobility. That's what everybody said. And but the bottom line was I at least wanted to know what they were thinking, so I can kind of talk to them once in a while about, hey, this is what's going to help with our mobility, because that was their goal, and that's why they're there. Again, it's a little bit harder with you because you're doing in groups. You guys aren't going to, I would sit down with people and have a conversation for 20 minutes with that person before I even evaluated them, blah, blah, blah. They'd fill out a questionnaire before they even came. So I knew a lot of these things coming in, and I could tailor some of my conversation around that as well. I did a great Strength Coach TV with Elias Scar from Results Fitness. He talked about the art of how to do that in a consultation, and I think it's the same. It's exactly the same thing. So,
yeah, it is. It is like you've got to be able to have, excuse me, to have that conversation, and that's like I find myself now, especially. I always think the good thing about having kids that are involved in this stuff is that you do kind of get stuck a little bit in these conversations with other parents, because a lot of the other parents are now becoming my customers. But the interesting thing about them becoming my customers is I think a lot of it is from seeing Mark and realizing, wow, he's advanced really fast relative to the other kids. Mm-hmm. You know, and you kind of look at that and say, yeah, he's advanced really fast. But if you looked at what we're doing, it kind of goes back like to my complete youth training product. You know, and some people's criticism was it's too simple. And I'm like, it was intended to be, you know, because it's what we're actually doing. And it's what we've been doing literally for the last 2 years. But when you look at someone like Mark, he deadlifts 205 for 10 the other day at 14 years old, you know, trap bar. And it's like, you know, he's getting stronger. He vertical jumped 25 inches. You know, it's like he's making progress on this really rudimentary program that a lot of people would say, oh, it's too simple. And you're like, in the beginning, it needs to be simple. As it would, you know, it would be like, oh, you're teaching my kid to read and you're using those stupid Dick and Jane books. You know, why aren't you using something, you know, why doesn't he get Hemingway? You know, why doesn't he get something, you know, more complex? And you're like, because we're trying to get him to recognize letters and, you know, 3-letter words and 4-letter words, you know, see, spot, run. And, you know, we can't get him into, you know, multisyllabic stuff yet. And it's really tough because, again, and sometimes you can get like, sometimes the parents will be like, oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense now. I get it. But in other times you'll get the like, no, my kid is really advanced. You know, that's, I love what it's amazing. And I saw Pete Dupuis, Eric Cressy's partner, posted something on Twitter the other day, you know, something about how many times have I answered the question of, you know, what facility is Eric at? Because I need the top baseball trainer for my 12-year-old. You know, and it's that kind of stuff where you're like, you know, you get so tired of it, but you realize if you're going to be in this business, you can't get tired of it. You have to realize that you're going to answer the same questions over and over again. And the next person who's going to come in is going to have the exact same questions as the last person. And the exact same thought process, because they're going to have seen, you know, whether it was, you know, a 30 for 30 or a YouTube clip or whatever it was, you know, about training. And it's like, you know, why isn't my kid running and jumping on a 60-inch box like, you know, like Bryce Harper did? You know what I mean? It's like, you know, because that's a dumb idea. And we would let anybody do that.
And I'm sure.
So I really am getting better. I'm improving my patience. I'm improving my delivery. And I think that's what we really need to be able to do as coaches. Whether we're dealing with our coaches, sport coaches, or with parents, is we've got to improve our listening and we've got to improve our delivery.
Yeah, and I think one thing, Mike, before I let you go, is Marky has been, you know, you did this on Instagram, showing like the 3 years of the progression. People are going to come in and be like, oh, I want Mark. I want that this summer to happen with you know what you did with Mark. Do that this summer. So.
Yeah, that's exactly the phenomenon that we deal with. You know, is people, and you know, we're all constantly, like I said, analogizing in terms of, you know, like I said, I think I just made that word up, but you know, like I always say to people, it's like slow cooking versus, you know, searing. Okay, you know, we want to put these kids in the slow cooker, and you know, give me some time, and I'll give you a really good product out the other end. But whenever you try to do this fast, it always ends up bad.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Coach, I took enough of your time, so thanks for doing this, and we'll talk to you next time.
No problem. Thank you. Great segment. I appreciate it, Ian.
All right, guys, right now at Perform Better, they have free shipping on orders over $59. Make sure you check out some of the sale items so you can double dip on that one. The next seminar at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute is Guy Massey and Developing the Modern Athlete, and Client Guy does a lot of videos on performbetter.com. He's also on the podcast recently. Summit season's here, starting in Orlando in June, so make sure you check that out. I'll be speaking in Providence this year, so I'm looking forward to that. That's in August. Also, did you know that right now, Perform Better has a special financing offer? This is very cool for somebody who's really looking to get some big equipment, looking to start out. No interest for 36 months, no down payments, and no payments for the first 6 months. You can check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm on with Rachel Cosgrove. Rach, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Anthony.
All right, we got an interesting one. One of our members, Brian Henson, one of our really good members, he's been in the game for a long time, 30 years, and he's been subleasing from places. And he heard us on the podcast talking about how I feel like, you can't really build the best possible culture if you're renting from somebody, or even if you have people renting from you, but you could still have a good culture. I know this for a fact, just from my own experience with being, working in an Equinox, which is a big box gym, working on my own, and then having my own facility, then renting to somebody within my facility, and then selling my facility and actually renting from that person that I sold it to. So
so you've done it all.
Yeah, so I have, I go downstairs every Wednesday and I still train like 4 or 5 of my guys, and it's totally different. The culture's completely different. There's different music. There's different people are wearing different things. The programming's different. It's not the same. But I wanted to ask you about this because I wanted to talk about, because I know you probably get some people in there in Results Fitness University coming in there for your consultation to talk about, you guys are big on building culture, but some people are renting from a huge training space or a sports facility. So I wanted to talk to you about your thoughts on this and maybe some best practices for building a culture when you are renting from a training space or a sports facility.
Yeah, and this is a great topic, great question. I think, one of our advice to people when they are renting out of another space, or maybe they don't have their own business yet and they're trying to decide whether they should open their own business, is we always ask the question, can you continue to grow within where you're at? And so, it sounds like in this situation, for sure he can keep growing with, if you can keep growing, if you can, if you're getting done what you need to get done, there's no reason to take on the risk of owning a business. It is not for everybody, and it is a lot of risk. And so if you're not, dealing with a lot of frustrations, if you haven't hit a lid of, how many people's lives you can change and how much money you can make, then stay where you're at. And, you don't have to have your own brick and mortar facility. Now within that, like you said, how do you make sure that you're building the kind of culture you want, because you don't have total control over your environment? And I think, you can still create that feeling of, your team, your tribe, your culture. And so, really, first of all, figuring out what that is, which I think it's so great. So many people that do start by renting out in another space and get all of these things in place beforehand and then go to open up their own place. It's like they already have everything done, because this is some of the hardest stuff to get done, and you can do it, within someone else's space. And so really creating that, what are your core values? What do you stand for? Which core values are really if you think about it, how you act, right? It's who you are and how you act, how your clients act. And so, I know he talked about a dress code. Those are kinds of things that, you're going to have certain standards that you hold for your clients, certain, energy levels. Do you take your training very seriously, or is it more a lot of fun?
Yeah.
So what is what are your core values? Who are you? Who is your brand? Thinking of it as more than, personal training or exercise. It's like we talk about a lifestyle brand, right? I know some of the people that, if you think about Lauren and Jason Pack, Achieve Fitness in Boston, they call all of their people achievers, so if you join their gym, you're an achiever, right? So you become someone, right? You become something. It's not just about joining a gym. It's about actually, hey, achievers, becoming an achiever. For us at Results Fitness, we call all of our clients athletes. One of our favorite quotes is, if you have a body, you are an athlete. And so no matter where you are, you first start at Results Fitness, we're going to find your inner athlete. That's, and so even, people that just get started, we're like, hey, welcome to the team, give them their team shirt, right? We want them to feel I'm part of a team. I am an athlete. And so, and many of our clients go on to become, world record athletes. So it's pretty cool. So that's the kind of ideas. Who are you building? What kind of clients are you attracting and who are they becoming, right? Like what's that identity that you're, bringing them on board with? Because I think once you figure that out, then you can do all kinds of stuff, right? Like whether it's t-shirts are huge, because if you walk into Results Fitness at any day, most of our clients that are working out are wearing some kind of Results Fitness, Team Results Fitness, some kind of logo that they are, sporting our shirts. And so that alone, right, if you're in another space and you have all of your clients that keep getting different clothing and they're always wearing your logo, maybe they have hats, they just start to wear your stuff, that right alone makes, your culture. And then just, be a pro, right? Like a lot of times when we're in these other environments, the standards might be lower with the other people that are in the environment with you. Don't be afraid to step up and really set the standard of something, above what anybody else is doing, including how you dress, including how you talk, including how you act, including how you record your programs, including, everything that you're doing down to the itty bitty detail. Like, how can I really make an impression so that people, around know, oh, wait, they're different, the people training with that person are doing, something's different. Right. So just thinking through all of those little details and how can you really stand out and really stand for your core values, your culture, and what you're creating. Like I said, that lifestyle brand of not just, a personal trainer, but actually something bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely tricky. And I think Coach Boyle answered this like saying, look, do the best you can with what you have where you are. And that's pretty much what you're saying. Like you could still control what you can control. And at the end of the day, the client, it's going to be about the relationship between you and your client.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started, we were in another gym, like you're saying, and when I first met Alan, that was actually one of the first impressions, that he was wearing, polos with embroidered logo on his shirt that he had gotten made, and he had gotten all his clients, shirts made, and we were in an independent gym, we were paying rent, so most of the trainers were wearing their workout clothes, and it just right away, it was like, okay, like this is a professional, right? You're a pro.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, cool. Well, Rach, thank you so much for doing this, coming on and answering some of the questions from the StrengthCoach.com forum.
Thanks for having me. And if anyone wants to learn more, check out resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
Hey, this is Alan.
And this is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Yeah, baby.
So I was watching that Warriors-Clippers game last night, Tim.
Yes, exciting stuff.
Epic comeback.
Love it.
Or epic
failure.
Yeah, whatever side you're on.
Yeah.
A lot of things had to go right or wrong depending on what team you're cheering for.
Yeah, exactly right.
But, I was reading some articles after the game, and one thing that came up is kind of interesting is like somebody noticed that like 3 of the top most efficient player seasons happened this year.
Like Giannis, James Harden scoring a ridiculous.
I remember the other one, but and if one person, so some people would say like okay, but players aren't actually better than they used to be. So by player efficiency rating, for example, or some other measures in basketball, like Giannis was more impactful than Shaq was in his prime.
Right.
And people just go, there's no way.
Yeah,
right?
the best ever, right? That's what they say.
And
all
so
the time.
they want to reject the metric, right? Mm-hmm. Which, there might actually be a problem with those metrics.
Sure.
But what's the other possibility? The other possibility is that players are just actually better by that metric.
Exactly right. The focus has changed, right? We've come up with all these new metrics and stuff. It's not just basketball, but players are now allowed really to focus on these specific metrics. Things like we brought up a while ago a new metric in football, QBR, right? What impact is this quarterback actually having on the game? Not just Jeff George hooking up 400 yards a game. Like, oh, Jeff George is the greatest quarterback ever. But and that transcends not just basketball and football, but players are now focusing on these things that have a super heavy impact on the game, and it's not just layups and shooting percentage and things like that.
Yeah. So like in basketball, player, Giannis had such an efficient season because he's a monster.
Yeah, he's a beast.
He's just ridiculous, and he also contributes across the box score. Right? Yeah. So
you can go the other way too, and with the 3-point game.
Yeah, and so we have today in basketball, we have what's called Maury ball, right? After the GM of the Rockets, where you have this really extreme optimization for threes, shots near the hoop, and not a lot of Tim's favorite turnaround hezzy Jimbo.
Fade away mid range, as I call it, which is impossible because my vertical is 12 inches. But
so what you have is this optimization to try to make your team as efficient as possible in offense.
Right.
And so that means that players they're coached to play a certain way.
Correct.
And then players develop certain skills. Like Brooke Lopez the past couple of years, he's become a pretty darn good three-point shooter. Right. Whereas in the past, before that, he didn't really shoot threes at all and wasn't that good at it. Right. So partially, it's like what's valuable about the game. Guys can kind of start developing those skills. They play a little differently, and that leads them to being measured.
Right, and that's because the coaches and the organizations know that this is going to be these increased efficiencies are going to lead to more wins. It's the same thing in football, right? We'll talk about defense in football. Things like quarterback hurries, pass, PBUs, knockdowns, passes defended. Right. These things all have to play a huge role in the game, which previously weren't measured but are measured now. And folks defenders hang their hat on these type of metrics now.
Well, so your best corner is not necessarily the guy on your team with the most interceptions.
Right.
Sometimes that's true, but sometimes the guy people just don't want to throw at.
Think of Revis, circa 10 years ago. It's like he had 3 interceptions. People are like, what's going on? Well, he's had 10 passes thrown his way all year. So it's like, come on.
So let's tie this back to kind of the every coach,
Yeah.
So for example, Tim, I know you just lost a fair amount of weight, like 20 pounds or so.
Yeah, just under 20 pounds.
All right. So we know that the way to lose weight is to burn more calories than you eat, right? That's correct. That's pretty trivial, right? But how did you actually achieve that? What metrics did you focus on to allow you to change?
Right. So I didn't just focus on macronutrient intake, right? I focused on specifics, things that I knew, would really affect me. I was eating way too much sugar, added sugar, right? I'm addicted to chocolate, so that was a big one. And then, boozing was another one. And it's not like, I was having 10 drinks a day, but even cutting out, one night a week of drinking 2 or 3 beers, that helps. And those were focal points for me. Right. So I focused on those things, which I knew would bring me to the larger goal.
So you chose the right metric.
Yeah.
It would be a lever for you that would allow you to get to the goal that you wanted to achieve.
Exactly right.
And so again, if we go back to the basketball thing, it's like, hey, I want us to shoot more threes.
Right.
I want our team to actually look for, pass the ball, move the ball, look for more open threes.
Right.
Good looks. So, we talk about train heroic, we talk about, hey, so what's the process goals we start with?
Right.
So
yeah. Get in the gym,
do your session, right?
Yeah.
And then we look at kind of things like the performances, like, okay, did you actually were you able to do everything the way it was prescribed? Were you able to achieve the things you should be able to achieve?
Right.
Right. And if you choose your metrics correctly, it gets you the right outcomes. Things like, we're going to do 3-rep max back squat. Right. That's going to definitely improve your strength per se and your back squat and your leg strength, and that'll transfer to something. Yeah. But if I say, hey, we're going to look at your velocity, right? We're going to try to hit 0.6 a certain level or whatever, right? Then that's going to change the outcome of rate of force or something.
Yeah, the back squat hasn't changed, but the metrics we're focusing on.
What gets measured gets improved.
You got it, baby.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach Podcast sent you for 10% off the Year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
Welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. My name is Diane Vivas. In part 2 of this series, I spoke about how we may need to bring a stability solution to a mobility problem. And I shared how this strategy can be used in the lower body reciprocal movement that involves hip mobility. For part 3, I want to share an example of how this strategy plays out in upper body reciprocal patterns, and it may help us to improve thoracic mobility. With the functional movement screen, we look at upper body mobility by using our shoulder mobility screen. This is where we ask someone to stand tall and we reach with one arm over their head and down their back, while at the same time reaching up their back with the opposite arm, bringing their fist as close together as possible. This screen doesn't just look at glenohumeral joint range of motion. It's looking at the ability to access good thoracic posture that then contributes to a good scapular connection to the glenohumeral joint that then expresses its available range of motion. It takes all 3 of these to work together to perform a good movement pattern. When we have poor thoracic mobility and posture, it will without a doubt affect the upper body's ability to produce good quality movement. We often focus on the local muscles around the shoulder joint, but if the mobile segment of the thoracic spine is limited, this could be the key to restoring better movement for the upper body. This brings us back to the underlying philosophy of the joint-by-joint approach, where the body uses an alternating series of stable segments connected by mobile joints when performing quality movement. If the neuromuscular system fails to support a stable segment, it may ask for help from muscles that are originally assigned to a nearby mobile joint. For example, if the lumbopelvic area is struggling to stabilize, this may encourage compensations that could limit thoracic mobility. Our strategy then becomes exposing the body to exercises that it can trust and feel lumbopelvic stability, and that feedback will support the body's ability to access thoracic mobility during that exercise. In FMS, one of the corrective exercises that uses this strategy is the side-lying T-spine rotation with rib grab. Now, the details in the setup can make or break this exercise, so let's talk you through it. Begin by laying on your left side with your shoulders and your hips stacked in a perpendicular position to the ground. Now take your top right leg and flex it at the knee and the hip in order to place the knee and the lower leg on something like a foam roll in front of you with a slightly elevated surface. Now the upper leg should be above 90 degrees. The bottom leg remains in an extended position and you want to reach your heel away from your head. Then place the bottom hand on the knee that's on the foam roll, and the top hand is going to be placed on your lower rib cage with your forearm running along those lower ribs. Now, the key to this corrective exercise really being effective is that the lower body reciprocal position with hip flexion and hip extension will assist you in locking in and stabilizing that lumbopelvic segment so that the body can really feel that it's stable. While maintaining this lower body position from the belly button down, take in a deep breath through the nose into that lower abdominal area, and then slowly exhale as you sequence, looking over your shoulders with your eyes, then turn your head to the right, then turn your shoulders to the right, bringing that top shoulder closer to the floor. You're going to be using that breath to facilitate the thoracic rotation and release tension as you lower that top shoulder closer to the ground. I always love when we can bring in a good feedback cue, and here we can place a yoga block or a half foam roll standing upright just behind your hips about 1 or 2 inches away from the body to give you feedback if you start to lose position and roll your hips back. And also the foam roll under the knee in the front, you want to make sure that doesn't move as well. That's feedback that you're losing that lower body position. Remember, this is an example of bringing a stability solution to a mobility problem. Finding ways to facilitate and enable that stability of the lumbopelvic segment just below the thoracic spine may help the body feel its way back to restoring that natural alternating pattern that we see in the joint-by-joint approach. That's it for today. My name is Diane Vivas, and this has been a Functional Movement Systems segment. For more information, please check out functionalmovement.com. Thanks and take care.
All right, now it's time for the Body by Boyle Online.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle's Strength Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. Very appropriate today. I have on Dr. Ken Clark. He did an in-service at MBSC about sometime in March, and great. I mean, honestly, it was on speed and kind of some of the latest research on speed and practical applications of that. And whether you're a beginner or advanced in speed, you're going to get something out of this. He did a great job with this. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Kinesiology at Westchester University, and he has a decade of strength conditioning coaching experience in the private sector, high school level, as well as the collegiate setting. So, Ken, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity, and should be fun to talk all things speed.
All right, yeah, and you know, we're going to keep this, we're going to follow that presentation, although we're not going to get to everything, obviously. You did a lot of great, showing a lot of drills. You obviously started out with the research, and I love what you did. You kind of kept it to your audience, which is, you know, for the most part, we're going to talk about coaching people, you know, for the most part, team sports, not worry so much about track and field and how it applies to, you know, which is perfect for my audience, working with so many teams. So I thought it was interesting. You said the 40-yard dash. You started out with this is a great place to look at team sports and speed in team sports. Give us, start out with this. Talk to us about why that is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think the 40-yard dash is a really great intersection between the world of track and field, where obviously speed is the only thing, if you will, and team sport athletes, where speed is a huge component of what they do, but not the only thing that they need to do. And so the reason I like to look at the 40 is, number one, you know, obviously it gets a lot of attention in the team sport world with the NFL Combine and now the NFL Draft going on. Obviously, a tenth of a second in the 40-yard dash, like if you're a skill guy, guy, for example, a wide receiver, that can literally be millions of dollars. It was really important in my own personal life. So I was not an overly blessed athlete, but just the ability to work on a 40-yard dash just to get recruited to play at the Division III collegiate level was a huge deal. And I think that although not everyone is going to be Usain Bolt, clearly everyone can make some improvement in their speed. And where most athletes get measured isn't the 100-meter dash, it's the 40-yard dash. And so I think it is a great place to start as it relates to linear or straight ahead speed. And the other reason why I really like it is because it encompasses all aspects of a straight ahead sprint. So in other words, you have the start and initial acceleration, and then you have the transitional acceleration phase, and then you do have a top speed phase towards the end of the run. So with the exception of like maybe deceleration, you can look at all aspects of an athlete's speed qualities or speed capabilities within the context of one 40-yard dash. And so I think it is a great starting point for those reasons.
And you said 90% of top speed is reached by, for the most part, 20 yards?
Yeah, for most athletes, that's going to be true. I mean, obviously there are some individual differences, and JB Barin and some of his groups have done a good job of highlighting that with some of the force velocity profiling. But generally speaking, most athletes will be at greater than 90% of their top speed by the time they reach 20 yards or 20 meters, however you're running it. And so I think that that's not generally understood. And I think it has some important implications. I mean, we all know that the start and initial acceleration are obviously key to running a 40-yard dash. I don't think anyone in their right mind would argue otherwise. And we'll talk about acceleration, I'm sure. But I think one of the things that's come out of the research recently, including our own research group's article on the 40-yard dash, is just how important top speed is to running a good 40. Because you are upright by 20 and at more than 90% of top speed, basically your entire time in the 40-yard dash is going to be highly affected by what your top speed is. Although acceleration is crucial, top speed really is the ceiling and just a huge determining factor for how good you're going to be. Pretty hard to run a good 40-yard dash unless you have a good top speed. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and you were talking about a tenth of a second being, could be millions of dollars. Speaking of tenth of a second, you were talking about, I love the example, the stopwatch example. The quick ground contact time is so important. Give us that example.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it really comes from my class lectures where sometimes I'm having to nag students to put their cell phones away. But a great one is actually pulling out your cell phone and bringing up the stopwatch application and just seeing how fast you can start and stop it. And for most people, that's somewhere between 0.12 to 0.15 seconds. And it's a great way to picture how fast ground contact is during sprinting. So at the beginning part of a race, in like the very first few steps of a run, the ground contacts are maybe like 0.2 seconds, somewhere along those lines. But really soon into the sprint, as the athlete accelerates, the ground contacts get progressively shorter and the flight times get progressively longer, to the point where by the time the athlete is at maybe 20 or 30 yards, if they're fast, they're on and off the ground in a tenth of a second or less, 0.10 or faster. And what that means is, because you always have to apply enough force down into the ground to support body weight, once you get rolling and your ground contact times are so short, you got to apply a lot of vertical force really fast. So we're looking at high rates of loading to run fast. And I think it's a really key connection between kind of the different phases of a sprint, how long your foot is on the ground, and how fast you have to apply force while you're sprinting.
Yeah, and I think people will get confused with this too. And you called it spinning. You see a lot of guys, spinning in some of these team sport athletes. That they're going so fast because they think I have to be on the ground, less contact. But you need better propulsive force too. Give us your explanation about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times with team sport athletes, just kind of from experience, what I've seen is you see athletes with like great quote unquote turnover, i.e. in the first couple of steps, they're spinning the wheels really fast. but they're not necessarily covering any ground, i.e. they're not pushing, they're not applying force. So although it looks like they're moving the limbs fast, when you put, an automatic timer to it or a stopwatch to it, the clock tells a different story. And so with those athletes, one key for speed improvement is just to make sure that they're really applying force effectively, whether it's through, a different cueing strategy, like, and I know we're going to get into that, but by really emphasizing, pushing on the ground to get better force application, or, perhaps we'll talk about some resisted sprint training, that sort of thing. But fast turnover, if it isn't accompanied by good force application, won't make an athlete fast. A good turnover combined with good hard force application during the first couple of steps is really key to make sure that the athlete is pushing on the ground and covering ground with the first few steps.
Yeah, and we've heard stride length. People talk about stride length a lot, and it kind of reminded me of one of the cues that you had was big splits. Would that be a similar idea?
Yeah, really, really good question. So sometimes for those athletes who just kind of spin the wheels, what you're not getting is enough separation between the limbs, separation between the thighs during their first couple of steps. And so big splits and big pushes, which is a cue we give a lot. So I work with the sprinters at Westchester University, and I wanted to give two shout outs actually while I'm at it. One is to head track and field coach Jason Kilgore here at Westchester, and another one is Corey Waltz, who's now the head strength and conditioning coach at UPenn. So those are two coaches I've worked with a lot, and some of the coaching cues that we give are big splits and big pushes. And so what that really encourages the athlete to do is to not rush how fast they're spinning the wheels, but essentially get a big split between the thighs, cock the hammer, and strike the nail. So they got to get enough split between the legs so that it puts them in position to attack the ground. Because it's hard to push hard on the ground if you're not getting big splits between the thighs. So for athletes who spin, giving them that cue, big splits and big pushes, can hopefully give them the mental image of, hey, you got to kind of cock the hammer and strike the nail to effectively push through the ground.
Yeah, and that I love that scissor idea that you were talking about. And then later on you were talking about really, having this great rate of force application, and then sprinting is like punching. So there's this almost like this violent push into the ground. It's very aggressive, right? Drive it fast, stop it quick. But I think sometimes we've heard this cue also like kind of be quiet, like you don't want to hear anything. Like that seemed to be the opposite. Like we want to hear this, this really big push into the ground. When we're listening, what are we listening for?
Man, that's like 5 great concepts that you just brought up. So let's talk through it. No, that's awesome. So yeah, I mean the aggressive scissors, acceleration and top speed, but mostly acceleration. It has to be violent. It has to be aggressive. Sometimes we'll tell our athletes, hey, that was okay, but it was just too passive. I mean, you gotta be rapidly and aggressively scissoring the legs. When we talk about cueing, the legs do work like scissors. So the harder one pushes back, the harder one thigh pushes back, the harder the other thigh is going to punch forward. Some athletes respond better to like a pushing cue. Some athletes respond better to something about a thigh smashing forward cue. It's really going to be a little bit individual to the athlete you're working with. But the bottom line is it has to be a aggressive, violent scissoring of the legs. Now, as it relates to kind of acceleration and then transitioning into top speed, I like to think of acceleration as a little bit more pushing. Like the athlete has to think about pushing through the ground or pushing the ground away. And I'm stealing those cues from other coaches I've worked with along the way. But those seem to really work. They've got to push through the ground to the point that it pushes their hips forward. Once they get upright, whether it's by 20, 25 yards, whatever, then it's more about having great posture and punching the ground underneath them, cocking the thigh in front, hammering the ground, and being stiff through ground contact. It's still a really powerful scissor of the legs, but it's just almost a different mental image about how ground contact goes. So just to summarize, like both are aggressive scissors, but acceleration's more, hey, you got to push through the ground, or push yourself forward, whereas top speed is like cock the hammer and punch the ground, cock the hammer, strike the nail, and be stiff. And then, like as it relates to some of the other aspects of like transitioning from like top speed to max velocity, everything else basically stays the same aside from the body angle should kind of just gradually rise as the athlete accelerates and goes from kind of initial acceleration, transitions into top speed. And then there's like 3 other things you said, but I've already forgotten because I'm so excited by what we're talking about.
I forget too now. And I love this idea. You said gradually rise in body and shin angle, and we want to think more jet plane, not helicopter rising in that acceleration phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, how quickly an athlete should rise, both the overall body angle and the shin angle, is going to be in large part determined by how strong they are relative to their body mass, how much force they can produce relative to their body mass. So, and we don't want to force that angle. So an athlete that's young and relatively weaker and can't produce that much mass-specific force, well, they're naturally going to rise relatively quicker. We still want it to be kind of a smooth jet plane taken off, not helicopter, as opposed to like upright rising on step one. Same thing if you're working with like NFL combine athletes or just NFL offensive linemen, or bigger athletes who are strong, but again, the mass specific force, how strong they are relative to how much they weigh, isn't that good. They're going to need to rise a little bit earlier on. One thing I see a lot, sometimes at like the freshman and college level, is we have athletes who they want to sprint and come out low. Like somewhere along the way, they've been taught that acceleration should be low running. And it's sometimes it's a technique that we got to gradually coach them out of. So ideally, the athlete does drive out at a low drive angle, but that's because they can apply a lot of force, both vertically and horizontally, and that will result in a low drive angle. But it shouldn't come from aiming to run low. If they bend at the waist in an attempt to run low, it's not going to lead to effective force application. So they should apply as much force down and back as they can relative to how much they weigh, and that should lead to a gradual progression of rising up in the torso and the shin angles and the whole body angle.
So without video, if I'm just coaching and I just see that, like you said, that hip hinge, too much hip hinge, or somebody kind of falling over, that they're trying to run too low?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something from my experience that you'll see all the time. What we refer to as a broken post, but it's, different terminology, same visual. Essentially, if the athlete doesn't have a straight line from head through shoulder, through hip, through knee, through ankle at push off, if they're bending at the waist or hip hinging, then they are trying to kind of force a little bit of a low run. And I think some of the best coaching cues you can give for that athlete are just, hey, you got to push up and out. I mean, obviously we want them to cover ground and to push out, but that athlete does need to effectively push up and out. And the major reason for that is that they need to get their limb in position to strike again in the next step and to do so effectively. So it's not just good to dive out low in one step and then to collapse into your second step. Obviously, acceleration is a progressive thing where each step builds on the next. And so having the proper up and out push angle sets up each step to be effective. So we make sure that we're having a good steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way to top speed, and not just a good first step and then collapsing all the rest of the way.
Yeah. So I remember when I asked you that first time with the 12 questions in the world.
Oh yeah.
We were talking about this violent, this aggressive push, this punch. Listening. What should we be listening for?
Yeah. So that is such a great question. So I don't think that the ground contact should be silent. And obviously there's going to be a little bit of differences, whether you're training on a gym floor, a rubber track, or a turf field. But to me, if it's silent, it either means that they're not applying enough force, or that they're striking too much on the toes, which actually happens a lot with team sport athletes, specifically soccer and lacrosse. I've found through experience, like soccer players, they play plantar flexed a lot. And so sometimes they strike too much on their toes. And that leads to like a silent ground contact. And if it's silent, it means that they're not applying force and that the ground contact isn't stiff enough. What you should really hear is that they're popping the ground on the ball of the foot, stiff through ground contact. And that could even be on a turf field. You should be able to hear some sort of pop, whether it's a sprint drill or whether or not it's an actual sprint itself. The ground should make some noise. But if they're popping the ground stiff on the ball of the foot, that makes a different sound than if they're like what we call mashing the ground. So you can be loud and noisy and it's not effective. So I would say there's typically three things, not trying to overcomplicate this here, but if the athlete's silent, that's probably no good because they're not applying force. If the athlete's mashing the ground and it's like they're clomping the ground, it probably means that they're flat-footed and maybe they're not stiff enough. So they're striking the whole foot, heel first. What you really want is ball of the foot, popping the ground nice and stiff. So that's kind of what I listen for. And like even on our team right now, we've got athletes who demonstrate all three. And we definitely use those audible cues to help coach ground strike.
For coaches, that's excellent. For coaches, just to stay on this and kind of an overview, I always love the mnemonics type of learning cues. The 3 Ps. Go over the 3 Ps.
Yeah, so posture, push, and punch. Again, throwing a shout out to my coaching colleague, Jason Kilgore here at Westchester. Day one of our preseason when we do running mechanics, he asked the athletes on the teams, what's the first rule of running mechanics? And it's always posture, posture, posture. Like that's the first thing. And I think this goes for any skill teaching. I just got out of teaching motor learning class an hour ago. I mean, when you're teaching any skill, you got to know what your big priorities are, because 5 things can go wrong. But if all 5 things go wrong, you can't correct all 5 at once. So what's the most important thing that you got to fix? Well, I think number 1 is posture. If the athlete's posture is wrong, if they're bent at the waist, if their butt's sticking out, whether we're talking acceleration or we're talking top speed, force can't be applied correctly, and they're not going to run as fast as they could. So posture's first. Second is push. And all that really relates to, for acceleration, is they got to make sure that they're, not just popping the ground with little force, but pushing through the ground to push their hips forward. So it's got to be something where they're basically pushing the ground to make themselves move. And then punch. When we get to top speed, that could refer to how they punch the ground, but here it's really talking about the swing thigh. If the ground thigh is pushing back, that means that the swing thigh should be punching forward or smashing through glass, whatever you want to think. But as far as the mnemonics, posture, push, and punch, great way to think about good acceleration technique.
Absolutely. Now, I love this example as well that you made. You were talking about top speed affecting the whole acceleration profile. And you talked about how important, like a 0.5 meter per second on top speed makes it like a yard in the first 20. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think for the listeners who end up going on the website and maybe seeing this in the PowerPoint presentation, it'll make a little bit more sense, but I can definitely explain it. The bottom line is this. If we look at a velocity curve, i.e., how fast somebody is running versus time or versus distance on a graph. And we look at 2 different athletes and they have the same initial acceleration capability. So if we say, okay, their ability to basically explode out of the blocks and overcome inertia is the same between athlete A and athlete B. If one athlete, let's say athlete A, has slightly greater top speed. Let's say athlete A's top speed is 10 meters per second, which is a little more than 22 miles an hour. If athlete A's top speed is 10 meters a second and athlete B's top speed is 9.5 meters per second, although that doesn't seem like much, that will equate to a full yard difference in a 20-yard dash. Now, again, we think about the first 20 yards as being acceleration, right? That's just kind of common thought or conventional wisdom. Well, if you're doing a 20-yard dash, it's acceleration. But what the math dictates, and this isn't just, me making this up, this is how the math plays out, and this kind of came out of our NFL Combine paper, is that's how big an effect top speed has on acceleration. So just a little improvement in top speed actually affects and enhances the entire acceleration profile. So let's say I take an athlete and I work on their top speed, and for whatever reason their acceleration didn't get any better, they would still improve their 20-yard dash time by 1/10 of a second, which is a lot for a 20-yard dash. And they would be a whole yard faster to the finish line. If you put that on the field, like we talk about football or soccer or anything else as being a game of inches, well, game of inches, hell, how about a game of yards just for a small improvement in top speed? So the whole point of this example was small changes in top speed lead to big improvements in acceleration. And just to finish the thought, a 0.5 meter per second improvement in top speed, it would lead to 1/10 of a second improvement in a 20-yard dash time. It would be over 2/10 of a second in 40-yard dash. So it'd be a big change in short sprint races.
Yeah, it's amazing. Can you define, before we get into this a little bit more, rate of force application for people out there? For the most part, I mean, we hear this a lot, but sometimes, when we haven't been in school in a while, we forget. So asking for a friend.
Yeah, sure. No, well, I think the reason why it's a tough question, or tough for people to wrap their heads around it, is because I think you can define it several ways. At least in my mind, you can. So rate of, and there's many similar definitions which aren't quite the same. So you could look at like rate of loading, which is if you're analyzing a ground contact during running, which is time from initial contact to time of peak force. That could be rate of loading, if you will. How I typically define rate of force application is just how much force is applied on average during the ground contact divided by what was the ground contact time. I'm not saying that's the only way you can define it. I guess for my purposes here, that's how I'm defining it. So, if you have 1,000 newtons of average force in 1/10 of a second, you would just divide 1,000 by 0.1 seconds to get your average rate of force application. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I'm using the definition. That's how I'm operationally defining it here.
Okay, yeah, and that's fine. Because I wanted to segue that into, you said max velocity training is the greatest stimulus from a rate of force application that you can get. This is why it's important for us to do max velocity training. If people are afraid of it, talk to us, expand on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, unfortunately, that some people in the industry are afraid of doing max velocity training, and I do understand why. Especially if you're at the high collegiate level or the professional level, if you're working with an athlete and you're doing max velocity training and they do happen to, strain a muscle, which I don't feel like happens often, but it can happen. Potentially you come, under heat for an athlete injuring themselves doing max velocity sprinting. So I understand that, the risk reward trade-off and why some people have shied away from it. I also understand that to a certain extent there can be, logistical issues because I was raised in Connecticut and live in Philadelphia. So for you cold weather people, you need a certain amount of distance, at least 20 yards to get to close to VMAX and another 20 yards to slow down. So there can be some logistical stuff. But the bottom line is this. If you don't run fast in practice or training, and then the athletes get in a position in a game where they have to run at max velocity or close to it, they're going to be at higher risk for getting injured in the game. I think there's some research to support that, and I also think that that's almost just common sense. So to work as a potential vaccine, quote unquote, to prevent this injuries in a game situation, exposing them to dosages of max velocity while they're in training or practice could be really, really important. So there's that aspect of it. And then from a training standpoint, everything we do as strength and conditioning coaches is going after not just strength, but power and rate of force application. Well, for those of you that have looked at the plyometric research, there's no plyometric, at least not to my knowledge, that gets on and off the ground as fast as a ground contact while sprinting at full speed. Again, if you're any good at sprinting, if you're fast, you're on and off the ground in less than 1/10 of a second. And even for most team sport athletes, they're on and off the ground in 0.12 seconds. That ground contact time is hard to match during any other plyometric or strength training exercise. Likewise, the amount of force that's being applied is extremely high. So if I take an Olympic sprinter who weighs 200 pounds, they're applying peak forces of probably 1,000 pounds, 5 times body weight, during the course of that ground contact. So think half a ton of force applied in the first little bit of ground contact. It's an amazing stimulus. And even for a team sport athlete who may hit peak forces of 3 times body weight, so if they're a 200-pound athlete, that's 600 pounds of peak force. So it's still a lot of force in a short amount of time. So I view it as a great stimulus. Hey, we're looking for rate of force application and training. Nothing beats it as far as top speed sprinting. Obviously, we need to be mindful of the dosage, when we're doing it, what point in the preseason, off-season, in-season, et cetera, what the volume is. But I think used effectively, it could be great for reducing the risk of injury potentially, and certainly for getting greater inclusion of high rate of force application in training.
So you said microdosing. Can you just give us a quick overview of what you mean by microdosing within the different seasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is hard to get specific because clearly it's going to, be individual to the athlete, the sport, the level, et cetera. But, I think in the off season, generally speaking, if I had to give some recommendations, you need to be working on acceleration 1 day a week, top speed another day a week, and then clearly if you're a team sport athlete, you're working on multi-directional speed and fitness on other days as well. But I think that for off season, acceleration and max velocity need to be, on separate days, or at the very least need to be trained 2 days a week total if you're going to combine them. In season, I think, trying to hit linear speed for a team sport athlete, that is, trying to hit linear speed once a week is definitely a good goal. I spoke at the NFL Combine about 2 months ago, and one of the things that those strength and conditioning coaches were most interested in was, when do we fit this in season? Because we don't have much time, and all the time gets taken up by the football coaches, as it should be. And in my mind, then you have to think about, well, where can we fit it into a dynamic warm up? So, following kind of Ian Jeffries' ramp dynamic warm up, if you're raising body temp, activating, mobilizing, and potentiating, maybe you put some progressive accelerations at the end of your warm up protocol, and gradually work out a little further and further so that you're at least touching upon top speed, once a week or maybe twice a week. So not to get too specific, but I do think that linear speed needs to be trained twice a week in the off season, probably Excel 1 day and VMAX another day. And if you can touch upon it, maybe as part of warm up in season, that's great. And then I'll end on this from a track and field standpoint. We follow what I feel like is a very effective and somewhat typical kind of preseason training protocol where, if we're going high-low, Monday, Wednesday, Friday are kind of higher intensity days. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday are a little bit more regeneration recovery. And our Monday is acceleration, Wednesday is VMAX, and Friday is more like speed endurance, that sort of thing. So I think that can be a really effective way to plan it out.
Okay, excellent. Let's talk about, again, this is the Strength Coach Podcast, and this is how, over the last, I think, year or so, Coach Boyle obviously has changed some of his stuff. He, found Tony Holler for the first time, and started listening, reading some of his stuff. So there's this idea about strength. I love this analogy. It's either, Bruce Lee strength versus Arnold strength. What are your thoughts on strength and its relation to speed and how much we need?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I know and love Tony Holler. I've spoken at two of his track football consortiums with him and Chris Corfest, and those are really great events. I've also been very influenced by Tony Holler and his philosophy, as I know Coach Boyle has. Tony once put me on the spot and asked my thoughts about strength training for speed, and I hemmed and hawed and really sat on the fence. I think it's a tough question to ask. It's a tough question to answer specifically, because it is one of those situations where it all depends. Certainly, I think for athletes that are younger, not as strong relative to their body weight, that strength training and getting a general base in strength relative to body mass is key. So I'm a huge advocate of it for youth, developmental athletes, high school athletes, and at Westchester, we certainly do strength training 2 days a week minimum the entire year. Certainly, what we do changes throughout the course of the year, but it is fundamental to our programming here. I think there are certain athletes who can apply a lot of force while running. Tony's got a sprinter himself. Guys like Usain Bolt, Christophe Lemaitre. If you're looking in the sprint world, there are athletes who can apply a lot of force during running who are not weight room strong and potentially who would not benefit from getting weight room stronger. So I think it's something that is somewhat individualized. Those athletes are likely applying a lot of force during sprinting because of the motion of their limbs, their technique, and because they're really stiff, elastic. They can then cock the hammer, strike the nail, and then stay stiff during contact, which translates into a lot of ground force during running, even if it doesn't make them weight room strong. So some of the research that came out of the Southern Methodist University Locomotor Lab, which is where I did my PhD with Dr. Peter Wayne and Dr. Larry Ryan, we had our 2-mass model there, which kind of explains how the motion of the limbs leads to the force application during running. And I think this helps explain why there are some athletes that can apply a lot of ground force during sprinting without being weight room strong. With that being said, I do think that for many athletes, arguably most athletes, getting stronger in the weight room at the very least will not hurt them for speed and overall athleticism, and in many cases will help them. I do think that at top speed, ground force is Bruce Lee strength and not Arnold Schwarzenegger strength. So I think that the athletes who can apply a lot of force at top speed, it's because they can wind up and really punch the ground aggressively and stay stiff. It's not a slower speed type of activity. I think that, where some of our more traditional weight room exercises come into play, whether that's trap bar deadlift or rear foot elevated split squat or clean or any of those other variations, which I think all can be effective, I think that probably transfers better to the acceleration phase, where the ground contacts are longer, it's a little bit more concentrically based, and that would be a little bit more of pure weight room transfer as opposed to top speed. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but I do think it's a complex question. So does that answer it?
No, it does. I think you did a good job of, you didn't sound like you were trying to skirt around anything. So that was good.
Hopefully a little more direct than I was with Tony the first time.
So one of the things I really liked was also, there's a lot of us here that, there's a few things I want to talk about. Can we get better without, how much better can we get without video, and some of the technology? Can you just touch on that? Because, you were saying, Amy, you did talk a lot about, just, hey, the eyes, looking at stuff like you were talking about looking at top-down mechanics, right? What are some things we could look for from that top-down mechanics? What do you want us to see looking for that? And, talk to us about what technology you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite questions. So I think it's super important to be able to use technology, but it's even more important just to be able to look at something with your coach's eye, the naked eye, and to be able to coach it. And I'll come back to technology in a minute. If I'm using my coach's eye or my iPad to look at a sprinter, and I'm looking at them at top speed, so we've kind of talked about acceleration technique already, but if I'm looking at them at top speed, I think the best way to think about it conceptually is a top-down approach, both because it makes it easy for you as a coach to analyze and to know what to look for, but also because I see this is how it actually affects the runner. So here's what I mean. First thing we want to look for is their posture. So ideally, we should see a trunk that's kind of upright and basically certainly not leaning back and definitely not kind of chest forward, as we'll see with a lot of team sport athletes. And hopefully if you have a relatively upright trunk and chest, that you'll have neutral hips. And this is so key. So with sprinters, they're generally neutral pelvis, but with team sport athletes, almost all the time, you're going to see an anterior tilt, i.e. the pelvis is rotated down. Sometimes this is due to muscular tightness. Maybe they're tight through the hips. Sometimes this is because this is the way they play their sport, whether it's soccer, lacrosse, football, they play with a little bit lower center of mass, hips shifted down. Whatever the reason is, when it comes to top speed mechanics, at least, it's not an ideal situation from hips. So first thing to fix is posture and hip position. That's the first thing to look for and first thing to fix. Got to be neutral posture and neutral hips. From there, after the leg toes off the ground behind the body, we should ideally see that the thigh does not swing too far behind the body, or what's referred to a lot of times as backside mechanics. Dr. Ralph Mann popularized this term. So if you drew a straight line down from the torso and you drop that plumb line all the way down towards the ground, the thigh shouldn't swing too far backwards behind into hyperextension behind that plumb line. Ideally, that thigh should immediately reverse after toe off and start hammering forward. So the less backside swing you have behind the body, the more front side lift you can have in front of the body, i.e. thigh lift or knee lift. And the reason why that's important, what was kind of cool about the research that came out of the SMU lab with Dr. Wayne and Dr. Ryan, is we all intuitively know that sprinters run upright with good knee lift, but this kind of linked, again, the technique to the ground forces. So if you run with good posture, good hips, if you minimize the backwards thigh movement and then you maximize the front side thigh lift, that puts you in a good position to punch the ground. Basically, you got to wind up like Bruce Lee and punch the ground. Well, you need to have that thigh up in front of the body to do so. And then from there, what you should be looking for is, if the athlete gets into that position, are they aggressively hammering the ground? Again, it comes back to that powerful leg scissors. And then once they contact the ground, are they being stiff? Which kind of comes back to the point you and I were talking about with, what do you hear? They should strike on the ball of the foot, and then they really shouldn't collapse into the ground. There shouldn't be too much bending at the hip, knee, or ankle. So again, just one more time to review, top down. Chest is neutral and upright. Hips are neutral. Eliminate backside swing or minimize it. Maximize front side thigh lift. Attack the ground. Stay stiff on ground contact. And sometimes what you'll see is, for your team sport athletes, is chest is forward, or they have kind of anterior pelvic tilt, and that causes big backside swing. It doesn't allow them to get their thigh up in front of the body. And then if they can't get their thigh up in front of the body, well, it's like trying to punch somebody from really close. You can't punch hard if you're really close to them. So because the thigh's not very high off the ground, they can't apply a lot of force. So that's how I view it when I'm coaching with the naked eye or with video. So as it relates to the video piece, and this is certainly a pendulum that swung for me. I do think it's important to use video when working with athletes, because especially with sprinting, if the athlete is fast, they're taking somewhere between 4 to 5 steps per second. I mean, that rate of motion is just so fast that some things just can't be picked up with the naked eye. So video can be a real asset. And, nowadays with iPhone or iPad or Droid or whatever, all of these pieces of technology have high-speed cameras that can film at 240 frames per second and give you a great view at what's going on at high speed. So I do think it's important to be fluid in using that technology when it's appropriate. But as I kind of went through, you don't want to become dependent on the technology. And I had that phase, I think, where you get so used to looking at video and you're always coaching your athletes off of video that what happens one day when you forget your iPad or you need to give them quick feedback or whatever, you still got to be able to do it with the naked eye and watch a high-speed movement, diagnose what the problem was, know what the proper correction or cue is, and then give that instant feedback to your athlete. So I think that's the proper balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to us, really quick. We mentioned about, being in the Northeast a lot. There's some really amazing treadmills now. Is that the same as sprinting? Because a lot of us don't have the room.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Obviously, when I was down at SMU, for those of you that are familiar with the research and the incredible lab they have down there, we worked with a high-speed treadmill. Depending on how it was geared, it could go up to 90 miles an hour. And we did it was an instrumented force treadmill, so we did a lot of testing on that treadmill. And sometimes we would get questions as, do you think the results from a force treadmill are analogous to those if over ground? And my answer is always this: from a proprioceptive standpoint, if you're just going from the side of the treadmill and then mounting it at full speed, obviously you are not accelerating up to speed the way you are over ground. So that part of it is a little bit different. As far as like the kinetic and kinematic data, the force and the motion data that we got from that treadmill, I think it's nearly identical to over ground. As far as training methodologies, again, I think the same sort of thing needs to be done. You need to know kind of what's similar and what's not. So obviously, depending on the type of treadmill, and there's several out there, there's, the motorized treadmills where the athletes are mounting from the side and the belt is already at full speed. There's the kind of the curved treadmills where the athlete has to kind of power it to get it up to speed, that sort of thing. I think it is a little bit specific to what type of treadmill you're working on. I do think that they can be a good substitute if you're in a situation where maybe you can't be outside all year long and you're trying to get away to get some top speed work in or some speed endurance work in. I think they have to, it's just one tool in the toolbox, as the saying goes. I certainly wouldn't do all of my training on the treadmill because you're going to be missing out on some crucial pieces from an acceleration standpoint and transitioning up to top speed and that sort of thing. But I do think that they can be beneficial if used correctly.
Okay, great, good stuff. I want you to go over just one drill, only because when I was watching, your presentation, this drill really, I felt like something just resonated with me. I was like, that is a drill where if you could just teach people to do this, you're gonna really make some good improvements. And that was the 3-bucket sprinter pose. So I want you to just explain that really quick, because if you Google 3-bucket sprinter pose, you're gonna get like some vans that come up and like some different. It's a really weird, just like. But there's some auto design.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that.
There's a Mercedes Sprinter van, reclining bucket seats. So, can you tell everybody what the 3-bucket Sprinter pose is, as best you can, obviously over a podcast, and then explain how you use them in the lunges. I thought that was a really great drill.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always want to give credit where it's due. I think I first got that term from, I don't know, it might have been Nick Winkelman, who's so great with the cues and the analogies. And then the coach that I really developed the series with was Corey Walt at UPenn. But so essentially it's basically you just have the athletes start by standing in a stationary pose, and they're just upright with, like, you could have them standing on their left leg only with their right leg flexed in front of them and their left arm, so they're just kind of in a running position. And the cues are, okay, we're going to get into sprinter position, and you got 3 buckets. You got a bucket of water on top of your head, a bucket of water resting on top of your thigh, the thigh that's flexed in front of you, and a bucket handle hanging off of your foot. And so the image is, essentially to get them into a tall standing posture with triple flexion. And so it's great for a number of reasons. Number one, it's just kind of like a great static isometric hold. It's a great way to develop single leg strength and stability. And kind of the catchphrase that we've used is, if you can't get into that position and hold it statically or stationary, you sure aren't going to be able to do it dynamically when you're sprinting. So it's a really good rudimentary drill. Second, it provides the context for the positions you want them to hit. So that's obviously the position you want them to hit when they're sprinting at top speed. And if you put that angle, you put that position on a 45-degree angle, I should say, that's the position you want them to hit during acceleration. So it provides them with a really good kind of feel for the angles they need to hit. Third, and this is just kind of observational or anecdotal, but it's a good day-to-day monitoring tool. So we do this drill both eyes open and eyes closed. Eyes closed, it's a great balance drill. But we found that with our athletes, like when they're really feeling good, when they've slept well, hydrated well, eat well, when they're ready to go, that they can stand and hold that position and they're, rock solid. They're like a statue. When something's not right, when they haven't slept well, the CNS is off or something, they're wobbling. They really struggle to own that position. So it's a great little just monitoring check. But then lastly, and this is probably the most important reason, it serves as a great starting and finishing position for a bunch of different other exercises. So I've seen way too many ugly lunges in my day where the athlete just kind of starts with both feet on the ground and they step out and they don't apply a lot of force and then they just kind of lackadaisically rise to their standing posture. And then we found that if you start and finish in this position, it basically forces you to push the ground away hard, whether it's a front lunge, reverse lunge, lateral lunge, or like a unilateral hinge, what we call our sprinter skydiver. It forces you to maintain good mechanics for those lunge series, to apply force to the ground. It makes it a more aggressive and active movement. And then you're developing balance, stability, and proper motor patterns, proper technique, just while you're doing this series. And so it's a great way, whether it's in your day-to-day dynamic warm-up or in your day number one of installing technique, running technique, it's a great starting place is really what we've found. And, just to finish the thought, I mean, yeah, that singular position really has changed a lot of how I've, taught speed, where I teach speed from as far as day one and movement one.
Absolutely. I want to just touch really quick on a question about heavy resisted sprinting. I know you really like this, the incline sprints, right? And again, I'll remind everybody you can go on Body by Boyle online and check this out because it's better to see it. But you have a 30-meter hill there that you're using. What's the angle of that hill? Because I know if somebody says, incline sprints, we've got hills at school. What's the angle we want to keep them at relatively?
Yeah, great question. And it's a catch-22 when I put that video in there because it is such a great hill and it's a good video. We have a 30-meter hill that goes down from our locker rooms down to our track and field. And I always feel so unscientific saying this. We do 20-meter sprints up that because it's the right angle for our athletes, and I don't know what that angle is. But the bottom line is we have our athletes start at the bottom in a 2-point rolling start. We have them go 20 meters up the hill, and we basically just cue, big splits and big pushes, and it just so happens to work out that hill seems to get the right result for our level of athlete. I wish I could give you more specific incline information. Frankly, I probably should be able to. I need to go out there and measure it this summer so I can give that information. So unfortunately, I can't. But okay. I would say a moderate hill that's steep enough to make sure that the athletes push and not steep enough that they're going up. Not too steep to where they're going up Mount Everest.
Yeah. All right, let's go. I've taken enough of your time, but let's give me 30 seconds right now of each of these questions. What are coaches doing wrong that you'd like to stop seeing them do, maybe in their speed, linear speed training? And what are some things that, it could be just an overview, again, really quick. What are some things that you think that coaches should start doing? 30 seconds on each.
Yeah, doing wrong, probably just not sprinting fast enough. So again, I think one of the number one things you can do to get faster is to train faster. 1 day a week acceleration, another day a week top speed, warm up, do some sprint drills, and then just go sprint, full recovery and sprint. What maybe could be added in a little bit more, competition into linear speed drills. I mean, for everyone, whether it's track and field or team sport athletes, ultimately you're competing not only against yourself on the watch, but against somebody else. So there's a lot of different ways to add in some reactive elements and some competition elements in practice while you're practicing speed training. So I'd love to see people just sprint fast more often. Okay, I think one easy way that's maybe not doing enough of that is reactive and competition sprinting.
Very cool. And all right, yeah, that was it. Really cool. Good. Coach, this has been amazing. I didn't even get to some of the things that I really wanted to get to as well. I mean, we just got there's so much stuff in here. You can see the lecture on Body by Boyle online. We'll have a link to your Twitter account for some other things that you're doing. So, Dr. Clark, thanks so much for coming on and talking about linear speed.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. It's Ken Clark Speed on Twitter if you want to reach out to me. And really appreciate you guys both having me in the facility and having me on the podcast. You guys are just the leaders of the pack. Awesome organization to be affiliated with. And thanks again.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 254 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Parr and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, they got free shipping on orders over at $59. The next seminar at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute, May 18th. Guy Massey, Developing the Modern Athlete and Client. Summit season's here, starting in Orlando in June. Make sure you check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Dr. Ken Clark for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning, performance enhancement, and speed. Thanks to Adam Doughty and Tim Robinson and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Diane Vivas and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name is Anthony Aranda. You can check me out at continuefit.com. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.